Welcome to the Longing for God podcast, Scott. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
I appreciate having you on, actually. This is one of the interviews I've been looking forward to for a while, because I've done, a bit of work in KI and have really enjoyed the methodology, actually. Like I've done a lot of different, styles of therapies, and for me, KI has been the quickest and most consistent at getting me into my stuff and allowing me to stay there and heal it and process it.
Yeah.
So I've really appreciated my experience with it. So I just wanted to give you a personal thank you for that.
Awesome. I didn't know that you did the work, so that's good to hear. It's nice to do an interview with somebody who's done the work before because the questions are different usually.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So I wanted to start, if we could, with a bit of an elevator pitch for KI. Can you tell me what is it and why is it useful for people?
Yeah, it's a form of inquiry where you, in a meditative style, like when you're resting as awareness, as in meditation or mindfulness, you prompt up really unconscious conditioning that's connected to repression of emotion. So it's really buried stuff. We prompt that into awareness, and we have different styles of inquiry, but the one that people come for is something is repression inquiry, where we learn how to make conscious really buried conditioning around buried emotions. uh, Anger, hurt, sadness, fear, shame. There's a mind-body connection around those emotions, and when we're real young, we bury those things for safety. So with ki, we're learning to make those conscious and bring them into awareness in a way that transmutes the energy, because the trauma response in the body is like this constant mechanism that's running. And before, previous styles of inquiry, I don't think really that I was doing, at least, were not mirroring that mechanism in the body. There was a big bypass going on for me and others. So with ki is a way of like really getting to the bypass, but that kind of limits it, because it's not that's not all we do is correct that, something that went array on the spiritual path, but we're getting to the root of suffering with our inquiries. That's what we think we're doing here with, with repression and trauma. We're getting really deep into the body early on the path and getting to the root and helping people process the various forms of suffering that come from that repression. And we just mentor them to get more and more skillful so they can sort of meet their own experience fully, including the buried emotions from childhood. It's almost like I mean, I don't want to say it, but it's almost like if you become skillful, you can begin to heal your own trauma if you
Mhm.
become skillful. But there's a lot of factors in that, right? Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. And when you say skillful, can you tell me a bit about what you mean by skillful at KI?
Skillful would be being able to make that conditioning conscious. Because I think when I was
Mm.
putting inquiry in the world before, I had my own unconsciousness in my body, and I didn't know that my anger repression was driving a lot of my suffering. So the
Mhm.
particular conditioning here to make it conscious, like really buried anger, buried in the body, um, to make it conscious. I mean, it's not even if you're talking about the repression, making that conscious, is that the question? Yeah. I mean, you've done the works. Or did I get the question right?
Well, I'm just interested in how you're using the term skillful, because so what I'm hearing you say is that when you're skillful at KI, you will be able to do this work on your own. So you help mentor people, and when someone develops a certain level of skill, they'll be able to do this work on their own. Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah, people start doing it on their own usually right away. I mean, some people struggle with that, of course, but the whole goal of mentorship is they start doing it somewhat skillfully right away. Mentorship is about helping them with the skill, because the repression and trauma drives them towards the bypass and the different forms of suffering. So a lot of the skill is not really, it's a skill. You can learn it, you learn it. The part of the skill is meeting yourself and how to meet yourself in your life and build that skill to meet yourself. It's not just one skill. It's like there's a context around it too, like
Mm.
understanding
Mm.
how suffering comes from repression, and then
Mm.
learning not just the skill but the context of how to, when you're suffering in this way, the skill to meet that suffering, in other words. And then when people can meet their own experience where they no longer have to hold their emotions back, or they're holding them back but they're processing that now, then that's what I mean is what when you have that kind of skill where you can process more on your own after having been mentored or picked it up in some way.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah. And just for people that might be watching this, a bit of background on yourself. So I understand a little bit about your background. You were a teacher in non-duality for many years, and um, through those years, you had chronic pain. You developed some chronic pain and discovered that what was driving that chronic pain was repressed anger that you were holding back. And as you started to unpack and process some of that repression, there was a new level of freedom that was discovered in that. Can you tell a bit of that backstory for us?
Yeah. Yeah. So I had chronic pain since the age of 20. It actually ended up being trauma, but I did not know for 28 years I had that chronic pain. That was a big reason that I came to the spiritual path, just constant
Mm,
chronic pain and other things. But um, but that was something that I couldn't deal with. I didn't know how to deal with it on the path, even though it was a big driver. So through the years as a teacher, um, I just sort of sat with that chronic pain like a lot of teachers do, different diseases and stuff. I didn't know what to do with it, and then the suffering kind of got worse and worse with that. The nerve pain got stronger and stronger. I had, by that time, had recognized the awareness, which is like a blessing and a curse because it's a blessing in the sense it allows you to really be with everything. But it's a curse when you've got repression because, there's no distractions in a way. There are
mm,
very fewer distractions when you're more awake to your experience. And so then it just became about, I've got to investigate this. This has been here for so long. And having had mental health and treatment centers, I knew that it probably had something to do, and the research told me that it had something to do with trauma. But I had to find that out. And yeah, so
mm.
finally working with the chronic pain has given me the greatest freedom I've ever experienced. But of course, the awareness is part of that too. It's the spiritual part, it's all together. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So in your work now, something that I notice is there's a large focus on, the repression work and the trauma work and getting in touch with that wounding and processing it, healing it. There isn't so much focus on the spaciousness, the awareness, the beauty of that space that we can find in those meditative states. Can you talk to me a little bit about why that is, why the focus on the repression and not the focus on the awareness?
That's an ongoing question, but I'll say this is what we found in KI is, and you've done KI, so you probably know, we can do something called utility inquiry with people, where we find out how and why they bypassed on the path, on any path. And like with the awareness recognition, there's actually energy and programming for people. Like if they say, what do I get out of identifying with the awareness? And the contraction in the body will respond. And then we start to understand that trauma is running the path on a certain level, and we have to be really
Mm,
careful with that because if trauma is running the path, it just seeks safety. So if you keep pointing to awareness, the trauma is going to keep doing it for you. And that's a dissociation or a lack of embodiment at the very least. And then you can have
mm,
health, of course. So if I'm going to point to awareness, I'm going to point it within the whole context of this to say that this is we're developing, we're beings, we're developing, and we can't just sort of say that here's the awareness. That's all we need, right? There's more to
yeah.
it than that.
Sure, sure. Yeah, okay. So it's interesting for me to hear you say that it's an ongoing question for you. And yeah, I'm curious about what that means. Can you talk a bit about what that means, that it's an ongoing question?
Oh, ongoing question as to, I said that, didn't I? Okay, because I think the awareness and the non-dual traditions are beautiful. And I am, even
Right.
I probably one of the most vocal critics. There there are others, but I love the traditions. And what I'm trying to do is find a way to bring it together in the pointings, like for myself, that I
Yeah.
can even sit with. It's not
Yeah.
even about anyone else. It's like, how can I be okay with this? How can I be okay with being a teacher with 7 books out there where there's this bypass that's inherent in the pointing that I found?
Hmm.
That actually the pointing
Hmm.
is for traumatized people becoming like a shelter. So I want to bring it in a way that just somehow integrates. So, what I've learned most is to be a student. I don't have all the answers. So what I just trusting my experience, I want to see how this unfolds. I want to be open to like pointing to awareness. I don't want to shut out that. I just don't want to do
Mhm.
any more bypassing. I want to, you know, I want to consider it more deeply than just, hey, this is great, this expansive awareness. There's a reason that we think it's so great. And I'll tell you that when you sit with realization for a while, it's not, you don't make a big deal out of any of that. And when you do,
Mhm.
there's probably a reason for it. You're staying safe,
Mhm.
you're getting love, you're getting approval. So you want to look at that, like, why is that so important? Because, this
Mhm.
spiritual thing kind of makes that really important. And a lot of us are traumatized. We just have to be careful pointing to awareness then, you know,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. And you mentioned the identity that we can form around awareness, particularly in the non-dual paths, because the non-dual paths will emphasize you are that, you are the awareness, and it can, like, you've used the word bypass a lot. It can bypass the
Yeah.
humanity of embodied experience.
Uh,
And that can be a trap because it splits off experience into what, well, it can often split off experience into awareness, unchanging, abiding awareness is real, and everything else is not real. All of the stories, all of the suffering is not real.
yeah.
It's just appearing in awareness.
Well, can I say this? That's the repression mechanism right there. There's the trauma right there. That's it. Because that's a narrative that isn't ultimately true. You don't need those ultimately true narratives. That's coming from for some reason for most people, I think. It's to keep them safe, those kinds of things. If you can catch
Yeah,
yourself in that thing, you can really experience freedom, but be careful with all that is what I'm saying.
yeah, yeah. And this is something that I'm sort of considering at the moment and playing with. And I like the fact that you said you're trying to remain a student and remain open and inquire into stuff, because for me it's like it's both and. We are awareness and we are also human beings in a body living a life,
So,
and we can include both of them. Does that fit
yeah,
with your
one,
experience?
that's my experience. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's my experience. But I think what I'm doing with this work, and Dan and I are just helping to bring that realization about embodied. It's not enough to just, we're talking about it already. It's not enough to just point to the awareness. We think there's more to it. And so, well, I'm
Yeah.
so much on board with that. That's what I'm doing. And I still very much think this is about, I think healing is about awakening. I think if you really, really want
Mm,
to heal, you gotta awaken to what you are, because what else can hold
mm,
all of that, right?
mm.
So no, I'm not throwing out the pointing to awareness. It just has to be integrated, like exactly like you say, integrate.
Yeah, yeah. An interesting model for exploring that is Ken Wilber's work. Are you familiar with Ken Wilber's work?
Uh, One of my favorites, yeah.
Yeah, cool. So his stuff around the four lines of development, waking up, cleaning up, showing up, and growing up.
Yeah,
To me, the waking up is the waking up to awareness. The
yeah,
cleaning up is the healing of the trauma,
right.
and the growing up is maturity, developing into a mature, caretaking human being, and the showing up is just presence.
Yeah,
So in Ken's work, there are four separate lines of development. You can be very, very awake to awareness, but not having healed yourself, not being mature, all these kinds of things. So,
yeah.
um, and I think that has implications for different spiritual teachers out there, different spiritual communities out there, because if we take it as given that people can wake up to awareness but not having healed their trauma, then that trauma will be playing out in their teachings, in their communities that they lead, all kinds of stuff. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that. How trauma can manifest through teachers if they haven't done the healing all the way through.
I mean, what I love about Ken, and I don't know exactly all of his studies, but he talks a lot about how people exposed to Eastern practices and even monks, they've been surveying them over decades. And he'll talk anecdotally about how Buddhist monks will get together and talk about how their meditation practice is going really well. but I can't get to the shadows. How about you? You know? Or like, the really deep states of realization that people are having, and yet they've got cancer, they've got chronic pain. These are monks who live that kind of life. And so that's a real
Mhm.
thing happening. And so that's what I like about Ken is he's just picking the brick up on that to help all of us in spiritual practice
Mhm.
to see it. It's a
Mhm.
really systemic thing, actually. He's just one person talking, but I mean, I think the future is really going to be a lot of this talk where we're going to highlight all of this to wake up and
Mm.
embody. You have
Mm.
to. And he's just like a
Mm.
leading voice. He's got a really big meta narrative, as you know. He's got a lot there. We don't go
Yeah.
that far with it. I love his work, but we focus on spiritual practice and inquiry mostly.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm interested in how whether you have any thoughts on how that might manifest in teachers not having
Oh,
healed.
oh yeah, I've seen it. Disease, chronic pain, scandals, crossing boundaries, cheating on your spouse. This is all unprocessed stuff, almost usually.
Mm.
Uh,
Mm.
just just leading other people into a bypass. That's one of the most hidden things, and that's not
Hmm.
even something that is earth shattering. It's a quiet kind of thing that happens. It's
Yeah.
ongoing. Um, and being very defensive around that also. And then if you go to them, or talk to them about trauma or repression, they might do that sleight of hand thing. That just is how people do with trauma. It's like a gaslight. You gaslight yourself. You don't realize you have buried emotions. You gaslight other people, and you just tell people things that aren't really true. You know what I mean? Like because you haven't gotten to that level, and that's how deep it's gone, I think. And these are people leading other people, and that's the important thing to remember here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. For sure. For sure. Yeah, no, it is important when you are leading a community or leading a teaching, you do have some responsibility to look at this, I feel, to at least look at this and to look at what's going on for you. Yeah. Yeah. And I think I've heard you talk about it before, but during the years where you were teaching non-duality, you just mentioned leading people into a bypass. I imagine you would have done some of that unconsciously yourself, leading people into a bypass because you were
A
bypassing.
lot. Oh, I've
Yeah.
done a lot. I take responsibility. A lot. I mean, 7 books of it. Yeah.
Yeah. But right, so but there's in the 7 books, there's some valuable stuff as well, yeah? Like
Yeah.
it's not just throw all that stuff out. It's like there's some valuable stuff there, but there's also important stuff that isn't mentioned in the books that was
That's
overlooked at the time.
that's what it is. Like if you took the work now and you put my 7 books with it, it includes everything I would like to include. Because it's the
Yeah.
awareness, the ground being, that's powerful work. And then includes the trauma and the repression work. But the books by themselves that don't include this work do invite people into a bypass. What it's not a bypass, really. It's what it is. It's just our conditioning is trying to stay safe
Yeah.
and get low. So if we don't highlight that early on the path, this is like people into bypass because it's unconsciousness of a
Mm.
teacher not understanding how people are driven by trauma and leading them.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Um, So for me, when I first came across your work and I started watching some of the stuff you put out on Facebook and YouTube and various platforms, one of the things that really resonated with me early on was you would talk about being an anger repressor, and you would kind of divide people into two camps a little bit, like anger repressors and hurt repressors. And anger repressors can often feel quite comfortable expressing hurt, that they've been hurt, or yeah, they've had difficult experiences, and hurt repressors can feel quite comfortable using anger and forced to push people away to stay away from the hurt, right? And every time you would talk about your story around anger repression, I really resonated with it because you would talk about being a nice guy to stay safe and get love, being a people pleaser, doing everything to make everyone around you comfortable. And that was me and continues to be me to a large degree. And as I've done some of this work on anger repression, and started to make it more conscious, I've become more aware of when I am angry and what might trigger me, which is new, because most of the time anger would be unconscious to me and I'd be angry without knowing it.
Yeah.
So that's cool.
Yeah.
But then there's this new thing for me, this new edge that I'm sort of experiencing now and navigating now, where because I've been an anger repressor for so many years, now starting to have the anger become more conscious, there's like a missing piece around the wisdom of when to express anger or how to express anger, and when to just sit with it and be like, okay, anger's here, but I don't really need to do anything about it right now. I can just feel the burn, and
Yeah.
anger, the energy of anger burns when it's just sitting. So yeah, I wanted to ask you a bit about that, like the wisdom of dealing with anger as it arises.
That's a great question because I went through that whole process of anger repression work. And so the more that I resisted the anger, even as it came up, the more it stayed around, obviously. So when I started to come into awareness like that, I just continued to process my resistance to it. Because even though I was conscious of it, that doesn't mean that I'm allowing it. It just means it's conscious.
Oh,
So I would
sure.
continue to do the work even as I was feeling it. And I really focused on being able to the work where we do around not being able to express it. Because that really there's so much suffering around that, not being able to express anger, hurt,
Mm,
or emotions. So
mm,
I don't know. When you ask me the wisdom around when to express anger or not, certainly we could have that conversation about what's appropriate and all that. I don't mind. But the other thing is, I feel like when you really go through the anger repression work, you don't store it anymore. You don't ask those questions. I think that comes from repression. In other words,
right,
it's a valid question, but
right.
it comes from the mechanism that's concerned about this. And so
Mm,
that's why we should talk about it because that's a valid concern. But at the same time, if
mm,
we can highlight that it's coming from, because somebody who doesn't repress anger doesn't ask that question usually. Somebody who has a healthy
mm,
relationship with anger never asks the question, probably, right?
mm,
It's
mm,
some sort of relationship with anger that asks that question, I think.
mhm.
And so that takes us back to practice, of course. But we can also get into the conversation of what is healthy and what is not, if you want to, like when to express it or not.
Yeah, well, so what interests me specifically is around my son. He's 7 months old. He's super innocent. He's a newborn. So he makes me angry, when he's crying or he's upset or he won't sleep or whatever, different things that are going on for him. He's disturbed.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like, and this might be my repression talking or some kind of mechanism around anger for me, but it's not healthy for me to express anger to him or to
Yeah.
he's just doing his thing. He's just life bubbling
Yeah.
away.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I can see in a context with my wife, for example, I can see where um that hesitance to express anger to my wife for fear of being abandoned or fear of her having a negative opinion of me or something like that. Like that's real for sure. With Jude, with my son, it's like, oh, where's the um feel like I'm walking a line and like navigating what's appropriate and what's not, and I'm not there, like it's not clear to me.
I'm not a parent, so bow to you for taking that on. But I'll just share whatever I will with you. Um, it- Here's how I feel about it. If I have a father, I want my father to. My father taught me vulnerability. Actually, he actually taught it to me because he cried in front of me. That's very powerful. But he could not model anger. So, so
Mm,
by holding anger back, he thought he was helping me, but his anger still affected me and created all my suffering. His
mm,
repressed anger.
mm,
And so when people who are
mm,
repressed, they think they're contributing something different than what they're contributing to the family dynamic. They just can't see it. It's all
mm,
unconscious. But when you grow up with an anger repressing father, there's a lot of issues that can come with that. And so if you
yeah.
can imagine a father who models anger healthily, who actually, because it's just authentic, it's real, but who follows it up with like true vulnerability and openness and says, look, yeah, I got angry. And actually, this is
Mm,
why I got angry because my dad used to do this, and I just had the insight that I got angry at you because my dad did that, and I want to teach you now that because although I got
Mm,
angry, I had to learn a lesson here, and I have to, like more. I think with repression, where you just start communicating more around emotions,
yeah.
and that's the link for us. So much of it is just not. We don't communicate what we're actually feeling, and yet that communication is still happening to those kids.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I mean, he's definitely picking up on what's going on for me. And there's a barrier. It feels to me like there's a barrier between us because I'm trying to keep myself in check and control what's going on for me. He's reacting to it, and there's a dynamic there that's yeah, it's not open. Mm.
But you're processing, you're breaking the chain now. I mean, that's amazing.
I'm trying to, yeah,
Right.
I'm trying to.
Right. That's
Yeah,
great. Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, you didn't give me any specific examples. I mean, that's my take on it because I shared that the other day. Is like vulnerability in boys is important, but they need to be able to feel and express their anger. And how do you do that unless you have
Yeah.
a father who models it?
No, I agree. I agree. You know, for me, my dad was angry, but his anger would come out when he was drunk. So, you know, most of the time throughout the day, there'd be no anger to be Mr. Nice Guy, keep it all contained. And then when he would drink at night,
Here it comes.
then he would fly into rages. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was my model for anger was like anger is really dangerous and scary and it shouldn't really be expressed. And then there's a release valve all of a sudden that all of it just flies out. For me, you're talking about examples. Like I had an example this morning. Jude woke up really early and I was completely knackered, just exhausted, tired and um he's teething at the moment, so he's got some teeth coming through in the top row and he's just really really upset. He's crying. um Hard to settle him. So I wanted to have a shower, brush my teeth, go to the toilet, like relax, get into my day, and he's screaming his head off and I need to soothe him and settle him as the priority. And there's anger in, I guess, not being able to meet my needs um, for a shower and the rest of it. So my process, what I did was I'd feed him, I'd walk him around, I try and soothe him, and sort of pull myself aside for a moment until he's settled, and then I can go and take care of my needs. But there's anger that arises in that process.
Yeah. And you're aware of it. Like some anger repressing fathers aren't. See?
Mm.
So you're aware of it. And that child is aware of it, but probably can't verbalize it, obviously, or won't be able to even
Yeah.
when they get older. But I've worked with enough adults now with anger repressing fathers to know that the father, all well intentioned, um, was a big contributing factor to the suffering because of holding the anger back. Because the kid can feel it, they can still feel it, even though we're not conveying it. And
Yeah.
if it's just like that's why I use the word gaslight because if you've ever had someone in front of you telling you one thing but you feel something different, when you grow up
Mm,
with a parent like that, where they're telling you one thing but you feel something different, it doesn't. You can't trust yourself very well in that
mm.
atmosphere emotionally.
Yes.
You know,
Yes, totally. Yeah. That's really cool. I really appreciate yeah, how clearly and succinctly you're putting it because it lands for me. It makes sense for me that you can convince yourself, I'll say I can convince myself that holding anger back with my son is the right thing to do, is a good thing for him. But it still plays out in that dynamic anyway. And I feel like just through this conversation, I'm starting to get an inkling that the healthier way to work with it is to acknowledge it in myself and acknowledge it to him, and then the healing can start. That's kind of what I'm seeing at the moment as you speak. Yeah.
how old is he, by the way? You said, and I don't remember.
He's 7 months, so he's really, really, he's a
Yeah.
newborn.
Well,
Yeah.
because I thought like I think I probably felt my dad's repressed anger from a very early age because I've done inquiry where I felt that. And that when I began to speak and hear, it would have been nice had he explained that energy. You know what I mean? Or expressed it differently. So instead he didn't. And then that was the emotion that I never could communicate with him about. He would cry
Yeah.
with me. I got that. I understand crying is okay. It's good. But anger, when it happened, it would just be this explosive thing after he held it back for a long time and we never talked about it. And so
Mm,
I couldn't own my own in that way. So that
hmm.
helped to get it that
Yeah,
way.
beautiful. Beautiful. No, I love it. And obviously, being 7 months old, he's not gonna, you can't have a conversation with him about it. But when he's 3, 4, 5, you can start. There's really good resources for kids now
Well,
about
yeah.
their emotional literacy. What is sadness? What is fear? What is anger? What is joy?
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, the younger
So
generation, you mean?
yeah, the younger generation. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. They're even the Gen Z is much more trauma informed. I can't imagine when your kid gets older what they're going to be talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like they have some challenges, some unique challenges to navigate around social media and technology and things. But yeah, in terms of being trauma informed and aware of these kinds of things, yeah, they've got everything available to them anyway.
Hmm.
Yeah. 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 So once we've done the repression work and we've cleaned up a lot of our trauma and wounding, um, and we've done a little bit of awareness work. We've sort of integrated some awareness of awareness itself. Um, what does the path, and I hesitate to say the word path because it indicates somewhere that's not here. It's like there's something in the future to get to. But um, where do we go from there? I'll just leave the question there. Where do we go from there?
From
From having done some healing work, having done some KI, having gotten to a place where we don't feel like we're repressing or holding back so much, we're able to freely express our
yeah,
emotions.
what does that
We
look
have some
like?
awareness. What does that look like? Yeah.
If you've done a lot of this work, it will look different for everyone. People who repress vulnerable emotions will show up different, for example, and explain what that looks like different than people who repressed anger, for example, because
Hmm.
there's just
Hmm.
different balance energetically in those people. So, like, if I'm doing anger repression work, we're all able to be more fully ourselves. That's what it is. And for those of us on an awareness path, that means we're embodying presence. It just means in life, I think it means authenticity. It's kind of a cheap word, but that's the medicine for relationships. That's the true
Mm.
medicine. Because if you can really have authentic conversations, emotionally authentic conversations, you can resolve conflict. You can leave when you need to. You can do a lot of things that you can't do when you're suffering. So your life is going
Mm.
to look different after this work. It should look different. Your relationships,
Mm.
your career. I mean, the sabotage in your career, because we're getting to repression. You should be seeing those changes. You should not be seeing the same patterns of sabotage. It really, if you go deep enough, all the forms of suffering that are connected to repression should be going away. I wouldn't say that if I didn't mean it. I mean, because you can see it for yourself that it's connected. It's not like me making stuff up. You go into your body, you see it. And so, but how
Mhm.
deeply you work with it, it depends on, one's own earnestness, because there's this trauma that just wants us to stay safe and get love. And we can get a certain amount of freedom and to go, okay, that's good. I'm just going to keep staying safe and getting love in different ways, but thank you.
Yeah,
That's fine.
yeah, sure.
But, earnestness requires an honesty around that too, I think.
Hmm.
Just say, hey, I'm hanging out here in my,
Hmm.
because there's a lot of freedom that's available. And if we don't talk about it, people don't notice it. They don't know it's available. And the whole time thing I want to talk about, because feel so different about that now. I feel like we're creating time to stay safe from the buried stuff. So if we dismiss time or, the unfolding of all this, we may be dismissing the buried emotions. But if we bring time into it and make the buried emotions that create the time conscious, then we don't bypass on the time game either. Because this is a
Hmm.
process. Even though it's always
Hmm.
now, there is an unfolding. There has to be, because we don't want freedom. We have to go easy into it because we're just fighting it. You know how it is. And so it can't just be,
Yeah.
like, okay, no, I'm just done. For most of
Yeah.
us, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Sure. So, when you say stay safe and get love, I hear that, and I get that a lot of people, most people are operating in that way. When I reverse that out, what I hear is if we're not trying to stay safe and get love, essentially we're willing to risk it all in every moment. We're
Yeah.
willing to not be safe, to be vulnerable, and we're willing to not have the approval of people around us. Is that
Yes.
how you
Yeah.
live now? That's how you
Yeah.
live
And
your
you're
life?
also, yes, you're also willing to leave groups or relationships for the right reasons, not because you're triggered, because you know that it's time to leave. It's authenticity.
Mm.
That's where I think this leads. And that's different for
Yeah,
people who lived in trauma who don't understand that. It scares them. you know,
yeah,
right. But
sure.
it's how we want to live because we're sick. We're
Yeah,
suffering. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, beautiful. And there are people out there that talk about intergenerational trauma and how communities come together when trauma is healed. And one of the people that comes to mind for me is a guy by the name of Thomas Hübl. Have you heard of him?
Yes, a little bit.
Okay, cool. So he talks about this stuff, and I'm sort of imagining if people have done a lot of KI work, a lot of cleaning up and healing, what that looks like on a societal level in companies, in countries, in, as a global society, what that looks like. And I'm curious as to your thoughts, whether you have any on that.
I mean, I don't even spend most of my time thinking that because I'm just so in the trenches working with people's stuff. I haven't really, no one's ever asked
Mhm.
me that. Um, I mean, I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't think there was a better way for us, like that I know that the potential of, like he talks about, Thomas Hübl talks about the unrealized potential of humans.
Mhm.
I totally
Mhm.
100% think that the trauma work is our potential, but I just don't envision it much because I mean, I'm creating it in my own life for myself. In terms of what
Yeah,
it would look like globally, I don't know. But I mean, with my own suffering, I was just concerned about having that in my own life, because but if everybody would own that, that's our potential. He's right. That's
yeah,
every we're literally sabotaging ourselves. We're literally holding ourselves back for safety. So when we no longer
yeah,
do that, there's our potential.
yeah, yeah, beautiful. And what does your life look like these days? What's an average Scott Kiloby day?
It's pretty if you looked at it, it would just be a normal day. I mean, I got a little messy room here. I wake up at 5 a.m. I do social media. I mentor people from like 6 or 7 until 2 and do
Okay.
business related stuff and 2 or 3. Then I usually work out, spend time with my family, my partner. We travel a lot. We have a Jeep, we have an RV, we have different things we like to do on weekends and stuff. It's kind of a normal
Mm.
life. It's mostly just energetic is what's so good about it. It's not like I have a big mansion or anything. I live in a two-bedroom apartment.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Cool. Cool. Because I think people have fantasies about what enlightenment looks like. It's like when you're enlightened, you kind of you don't need the world anymore. You go and meditate in a cave somewhere or
I tell you what,
that
no,
sort of stuff.
I get that. I get that. But see, with my anger repression, I was such a disconnector. So that's what I was doing for so long is just go. But to me, it's about life. It's like you said, it's the
Yeah.
human thing. I'm like wanting to like engage now.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah. Cool. Awesome. No, I love that. And the Jeep and the RV and the going on trips is how you engage. Like that's and spending time with your partner. That's how you enjoy engaging. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, cool. Cool. And what's next for sort of KI and natural recovery from suffering? Where are you heading with the work and the organization?
A few different places. So we're developing we space, which is just where you take into consider when we're helping people, the transparency of the helper, so that we spot codependent patterns and different patterns, which I think are really important. We're developing that out. We're also just we're developing a mentorship space now. We've had a members area where people come and do the work and share, but we're going to create a mentorship space where you people can come and be mentored to learn the work in a really supportive environment. So we're building that and just having a lot of fun on social media, mostly.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen a lot of those videos. There's lots of fun videos being released. I've been enjoying
Yeah, thanks.
it. And so yeah, just sort of coming to wrapping up here, is there anything that that we haven't covered that you wanted to sort of cover or plug, or any specific topic that you wanted to speak on before we close out?
No, I don't think so. I think you covered some interesting ones.
Mm, cool. Cool. Well, I just want to say again, thank you so much for everything you're doing with KI. I've really personally benefited a lot from it, and it's been yeah, an interesting journey. And as I say, there's no other psychotherapeutic model that I've come across out there that has been so quick and so effective at getting me into stuff, buried stuff. So I appreciate it, and thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you for having me here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Scott. Take care.
Yeah.